All right, this week, help me out on the top trends. What are the Mariners doing? Are they trending up? Are they trending down? It is Matt Snyder of CBS Sports. He brings out the power rankings every single week, and he's got the Seattle Mariners ranked number 12. Matt, first of all, welcome to the Top Step.
Good to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, no, I appreciate it. Now, you've got the Mariners hovering around number 12. So tell me this. This is a weekly thing, right? These power rankings come out, and you can catch it over at cbssports.com. You can see all of Matt's articles. A good one about arm injuries that I highly recommend. But you got the Mariners hovering at number 12. Have they, in weeks have gone by, have they been trending up, downwards? Where are they sitting right now compared to where they've been all year long, in your opinion?
All over the place. I think heading into the year, I feel like I had them around 10. It's hard to remember because I do it every single week, so I would have to go back and look. But I believe they were around 10th heading into the season. I believe that they are at minimum a fringe playoff contender. They're definitely a contender to win the AL West. They're definitely a contender to win one of the wild cards if they don't win the AL West. So I think they're going to be in that playoff mix all year. I believe, like I said, I had them around 10 heading into the year. Then they kind of a slow start, dropped down. I think maybe as low as 17, 18-ish. Yeah. Then they came back up to 10, dropped them below the Twins after the Twins won that series. But, I mean, the Twins are beating everybody right now. So they're still right there. I mean, we are at the point where we have 12 playoff teams now. So if you're sitting at 12, I'm saying that you're a playoff caliber ball club. So, yeah, things fluctuate a lot more in the early going, because when I have to do these every single week.
Right.
And it's hard to get a read sometimes on teams where – they're playing different levels of competition. For example, when the Twins got really hot, we had to talk about, well, yeah, the Twins have won 10 in a row, but 7 of those are against the White Sox. The other 3 are against the Angels. It's still hard to win 10 in a row no matter who you play, but we need context behind that winning streak. So it's tougher to slot them every single week early in the season, but I do it because for some reason it's immensely popular. It's usually the biggest hitter on our site.
Where did they end up at the end of the season last year? Because it was an interesting year for the Mariners, right? They got off to a slow start in 2023. Then in the month of August, they just went on this run. And I guarantee they would have climbed up your ladder a little bit. But where did they end up? When overall, from when you if you can go back to 2023, I'll get to 2024 here in a second. So where coming out of spring training, I'm sure you do this season preview and you're trying to predict where teams are.
Yeah.
Where do you have them, and where did they end up after a kind of a crazy back and forth season?
I'm sure that I had the Astros winning the AL West.
Right.
Actually, I think I had the Astros number 1 heading into the season, even though they lost Verlander. I'm sure I had the Mariners second in the AL West and taking one of the wild cards. So they're probably 8-ish going into the year. At the end of the year, 12 or so, because there's 12 playoff teams, but they were definitely ahead of the Marlins. Like, the Marlins were a bad playoff team.
Right.
So I think I had the Marlins like 14th or so, even though they made the playoffs. So maybe 11, maybe 12. Right. The funny thing is, right in the range where the Rangers were, right? Because they only finished 2 games behind them, and the Rangers went on to win the World Series. But that AL West race went right down to the final few days of the season. So I don't remember exactly, but I'm sure that I had the 3 AL West teams bunched up pretty well, probably with the Astros on top of the Rangers and Mariners. So maybe 11th, if I had to guess, with the Rangers like 10th.
Yeah, the obvious answer here is, if to get into, say, call it the top 10, right, for the Mariners, what offensively I said this yesterday, actually. I think when we were talking to you about this, it's a situation where offensively it wasn't like they were coming into the season being this juggernaut, but it's been really tough to figure out who they are offensively. But what do they need to do? What do they need to add, do you think, offensively to get them to that top 10? Obviously, the pitching speaks for itself. It's been amazing.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like I told you on the radio, the biggest thing is once Julio starts to be the Julio that we know he can be, that elevates everybody around him. And it's unfortunate in some ways, but it seems like he might be, as I said on the radio, one of those slow starters like Mark Teixeira was, like Ryan Sandberg was, and like so many other guys, where it doesn't seem to start clicking for them until the middle of May or even late May, and then they become themselves. And that the good news is, we know after 2 years, the kind of player he is, that we're pretty sure he's going to become the Julio that he's been. So it's only a matter of time before it starts to click and he gets really hot. maybe a little more power. I know the offseason they wanted to trade off, like with Teoscar moving on there, and the goal seemed to be to want to cut down on the strikeouts, but then they're striking out a million times again this season. So it's
Yeah.
I don't know. It's interesting what the Padres did when they added Arise. They have a lineup full of guys who are big on power, strike out a lot. They put Arise at the top who never strikes out, and he hits for a high average. It's really helped them kind of balance the offense. There's no other Arise on the market right now, but maybe they could use somebody at the top of the order who is more like, I mean, not to this extent, but as in Seattle would be very familiar with an Ichiro type where not necessarily the power there, but you get an average guy. The average guys seem less prone to big slumps to me. Because if you're putting the ball in play all the time, it's going to find some holes.
Yeah, it's funny, man, because like, you know, the you get paid now for hitting doubles, hitting home runs, and who cares if you strike out? But then all of a sudden you look at this Mariners lineup, and you know, there's been times where, man, but I got to say, lately, all of a sudden they're showing that flashes of offense, man, that can hopefully get him into Matt Snyder's top 10. That is for sure. Who in your you know, from setting out in spring training, you have this. We're not going to call it a season preview, but kind of like that feel of like where everyone's going to kind of end up at the end of the year. So far as we head into May, that we've already got a first good big 6-week chunk worth of season. Who's been the biggest surprise from a negative standpoint in regards to just really underperforming and nothing that you expected?
National expectations, it's the Cardinals. I saw a lot of people picking the Cardinals to win the Central heading into the season. They're terrible. They're one of the worst teams in baseball. Maybe I'm immune to getting fired up about the Cardinals because I grew up a Cubs fan and I have some inherent bias in there. But does
that naturally drop them 2 places in rankings every week?
I was not near as high on them as everybody else. I really was like, what's everybody seeing here? They don't look that great to me, but so many people were picking them to win the Central. But I think you can look at the Diamondbacks, who just started to play better baseball, but they looked terrible. Corbin Carroll, I don't know if his shoulder was bothering him or if it was just a slow start or what, but he'd been bad. The Giants, I think they made all those late signings in spring training and it looked like they were trying to become a playoff contender there. Maybe that had something to do with the slow start because the guy's not being in camp for the duration of camp probably isn't that good of a thing there. Those are the bigger ones that stick out to me. I'm sure the Blue Jays and their fans would say very disappointed. An early answer for that would have been the Twins, but then they won 17 of 20 to pull themselves out of that hole. And that shows you how fast you can turn it around there in this sport where we play every single day.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's like you sit back and at some point, like the Mariners had a run like that in August, and it's like you can't. If you sit back and go, oh yeah, at some point they're going to just like rattle off 15 in a row. It's just
it's like what year was the All-Star game in Los Angeles? Because it was right around, was it 21?
That was 2022, right? It was
20,
LA.
Yeah, 21 was Colorado. 22, the Mariners had that streak right before the All-Star break.
Right.
And they're playing the Astros right after the All-Star break. It was like they weren't contenders at all, and they just went bonkers for 2 weeks, and now they're right in the middle of the race.
Oh yeah, that's wild, man. All right, who's the biggest on the positive side? Who's the biggest surprise that you're like, wow, man?
There's been some good ones there. The Royals, I think a lot of us were happy about what the Royals did in the offseason because they actually tried. They signed some guys on the periphery. They actually, so many of these teams, when it looks like they might not be contenders, would rather just tank and bottom out. And I like it when teams they were bad last year, but they have a few interesting players such as Bobby Witt Jr. They had the mainstay in Salvador Perez, and they went out and they signed guys like Seth Lugo, who would probably win the AL Cy Young right now. So the Royals are a good one. The Guardians, I did not think they were going to be very good, and they started amazingly. They've come back a little bit, but they're still right around first place there. The Red Sox, I did not think that they were going to be very good at all. I thought they'd be last place in the AL East. But when I talked to Liam Hendricks before the season, he said one of the reasons he liked them when he got the offer was they always seemed to punch above their weight. And boy, has he turned out to be right so far. Because if you look at the Red Sox personnel compared to their record, especially in that division, it doesn't seem like they should be that good. But yet they're right there.
The one thing I will say this, I've talked to a couple, I'm not going to say older, guys who have played back in the day or anything like that, but and I'm going to ask Mike Cameron about this too. He's coming up after the break here, but The Red Sox, to me, it kind of drives me nuts, the fact that they're a big market team, but they're playing this like rebuild the last couple of years.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like, no, go spend money. Like, let's go. Like,
Well, yeah, they brought in Heimblum, and one of the things, the biggest thing was they wanted to trade Mookie Betts. And if you're the Red Sox, you should never ever be trading a Mookie Betts.
no.
It was the second the Dodgers traded for him, they extended him. That's what you should be doing. And it seemed like he was trying to operate the Red Sox as the Rays. And
Please
where
don't.
Andrew Friedman has been so good, as opposed to other people who came from the Rays pipeline in the front office, was Friedman said, now that I'm in LA, I'm going to take some of those principles that we had in developing talent from the Rays and identifying cheaper guys. And they've hit on some of the guys like Max Muncy there. But it was also like, we're going to do that, but we're going to supplement it with Mookie Betts and Freddie Freeman and Shohei Ohtani because we can.
Yeah,
The Red Sox
right.
under Bloom were not doing that.
Right.
They extended Devers, but like they let Xander Bogaerts walk. They had traded Mookie Betts, which was the biggest one, but they weren't in on a lot of these biggest free agents either. And I mean, you're the Red Sox, man. Act like it.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. And you bring up the Dodgers, like just what they've been able to do, and balance that. They develop well. They bring guys up. They have a certain way of doing things, a certain kind of identity, if you want to call it that. And then all of a sudden, then they go out and they spend money. But I love what you said too about the Kansas City Royals. Just adding enough personnel, adding guys who can just make a difference to a young core, and their pitching's been really, really good. We just saw them.
It's fill out a
Seattle.
roster,
Yeah,
Some
absolutely.
of the teams that look like, hey, we might win 75 games, so let's not even try. Let's just throw a bunch of,
Yeah.
rookies in there who maybe aren't ready, or grab some veterans on their last legs.
Right.
Instead, they were actually like, hey, let's fill out a rotation here. Let's get a couple other, position players to start. And they, again, I hate to make it sound so simple, but just trying to get better on the fringes of the roster, it can make a big difference.
Yeah. Now you've got the Baltimore Orioles wedged in there between the Phillies and the Dodgers in number 2, right?
Yeah.
I love to see it again. I'm kind of contradicting myself here because I love when teams just go out and just blow money on players, everything else, and obviously the Dodgers hovering behind them at number 3. But the Baltimore Orioles, even with Jackson Holiday, coming up, not going off, they've got so many good young players. Talk to me about the Baltimore Orioles, man. What gets them to number 2?
I mean, it's the job that Mike Elias did in building them. It was incredible in terms of hitting on almost every guy. Now, I will say I'm not a fan of torturing the fan base for an extended period of time like they did. Like they were in the 40s and wins multiple seasons. I hate that aspect of it. But man, it's hard to argue with the success he had in that approach. I don't think everybody would be that successful if they bottomed out like that. But man, they really hit on everybody to the point that they don't have places to play everybody. Like Kobe Mayo right now in the minors in AAA, he would be starting for a lot of big league teams and they just don't have any place to put him.
Right.
They're going to make room for Jackson Holiday once they're ready to bring him back up. But where Elias needs to be aggressive now is they already traded for Corbin Burns in spring training. It looks like they might need another rotation arm. They definitely need to address the back end of the bullpen because Craig Kimbrell right now ain't it. Felix Bautista had Tommy John surgery late last season. So will Elias be aggressive in using all that prospect depth as currency to trade for proven big league players where he needs them? They have all the position player depth. They need more depth in the rotation, and they need lights out back end guys. Is he aggressive enough to get, say, Mason Miller at the back end of that bullpen? All of a sudden, they're World Series favorites. It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah.
And the other thing that it's interesting about, since you mentioned that they were second in the power rankings, is heading into the year, my feeling was Dodgers Braves might be 1-2 all year. But the Phillies and Orioles have both put themselves in position where I think we have a clear-cut top 4, where those 4 teams are elite, and then there's a noticeable step down before everybody else.
Yeah, that's a good point. You mentioned Mason Miller too. Look, the Oakland A's, I don't even know where to start with them in regards to 2024 and all the moving to Sacramento and everything else that goes with it. But if they give up Mason Miller that's because they're getting some attention, they're getting some respect right now. They're getting some attention nationally on a good, in a good way where they could probably turn their comments back on social media. And it's like, if you just go ahead and, to flick past him to someone, you're like, oh, come on, let's go. Please
It would
don't.
be like they've already pulled the rug out from underneath the fan base in Oakland. It would be like pulling the rug out from underneath the other players on the team now too.
That's a good point. Yeah.
But I was thinking of it from the aspect of, let's be real, in this day and age, he's throwing 103, 104 every single pitch. He's probably going to get hurt within the next few years.
Right.
And the A's probably aren't going to try to contend, not seriously contend, until they get to Vegas. By that time, he's closer to free agency. If they could get back Mayo and one other top prospect from the Orioles, it might make more sense for the betterment of their franchise down the road. It's just harder for players in the clubhouse, and I'm sure you've experienced it before. It's harder to sell players in the clubhouse on that because they're thinking right now, even if a lot of us don't believe they can contend, but they're saying, we're only 4.5 games out. What are you doing to us?
Do you think the Oakland A's, once they get to Vegas, will change their business model? Like,
No.
No, okay, it's going to be the
Absolutely
same.
not.
Yeah, it's going to be the same bit because
They're
people
just gonna
assume
try
that.
to make the ownership is just going to try to make money, and Vegas will be the smallest market in Major League Baseball. It's smaller than Milwaukee. A lot of their revenue they're going to get from out of town fans who are in Vegas, walking the strip and decide to go to a game.
Exactly.
I don't know about merchandising there. The local fan base has been great for the Golden Knights, and it looks like it might be pretty good for the Raiders too. I mean, but NFL can't fail anywhere.
Yeah.
I don't know how strong it's going to be for the A's there. I think they're going to operate just the same.
I agree. I mean, I have people say, "Oh, once they get to Vegas, they're going to have a new stadium." And now I'm like, put the stadium aside. Sure, they'll have a nice new stadium. It's going to be the same business model. And plus, you mentioned too, like out of town. I'm not saying the population in Vegas. Yeah, they have obviously they have people away from the strip, but you're right, man. Or people who have moved to Vegas, just like similar to Tampa or
the transplant crowd's tough because a lot of people are loyal. Like we've seen it in Florida. Let's say with the Tampa Bay, there's still more Yankees or not more, but just as many. It feels like Yankees and Red Sox fans as there are Rays fans.
100%. Yeah. No. It's just man, what a mess. And I totally get it. If they move Mason Miller and you mentioned the injury thing. You have like I said, you have a really good article that I read through and we talked about on the radio yesterday. And I'll have to have you come back at some point and talk through some of the arm injury stuff because that's another fascinating topic. And I agree with you. It's not going to go away, especially I deal with a lot of kids on the youth side and I have a lot of strong opinions about some of the stuff, but the topic isn't going away either. It's not something that came up for a week. It's continued to get talked about over and over and over. So anyway, well, Matt, listen, man, this has been an absolute blast. I appreciate you joining me here on the Top Step, and I'd love to have you back at some point. Hopefully, when the Mariners, when they're in the top 5 of the power rankings, we'll have to talk it over.
Maybe it's attainable. Top 4 might not be, but top 5 is attainable.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, if they start swinging the bats like they're capable of. Yeah, we shall see. Absolutely. So, Matt, massive thank you.
Sure.